let me take an opportunity to just acknowledge the excitement that we have as we bring forth our keynote speaker for today, Miss Marion Jones.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, it is a real joy and honor. Thank you all for hanging around to listen to me this afternoon. It's especially nice to be able to satisfy my passion of sharing my journey and my story close to home. So for that, I'm extremely appreciative. I live right down the street in Pflugerville. So it's nice when I can just drive 20 minutes down the road to share. But before I go any further, I really want to take a moment to thank a number of people who, without them, none of this would be possible. And of course, I'd like to thank Mr. Michael Lofton, the founder of the African American Youth Harvest Foundation, Miss Kia Wallace. She's probably running around here doing some work. Thank you for inviting me here today, but mostly for the great vision and work that they have and are continuing to do in bringing awareness to ensure that low-resource families have access to those resources. They have access to the resources needed to build strong, sustainable families, and particularly the African American youth and other at-risk populations. I also want to say that it is an honor to have been on the same stage with Ms. Fitzgerald and Dr. Dixon and Michaela, who I am a super huge fan of now. She brought me some. I told her that every table in here should have had her lemonade on it, right? So for years to come, please, we'll make that happen. And as most of you probably know already, once Mr. Lofton sets his mind to doing something, he's going to make it happen. And by whatever means he has available. We had the opportunity to meet a few months back at a conference that I spoke at in San Antonio. He's the one that's going to make those calls and try to get the support so that it gets done. So we appreciate what you're doing, Mr. Lofton, as well as everyone also on the board of directors. So over the past few years, I've had the privilege of speaking at a number of functions across the country, even internationally. Symposiums, colleges, high schools, church organizations, and I've really grown in my appreciation really of what it takes to put on events such as this. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes to make it possible, from creating themes to securing sponsors to choosing the right locations to getting people to volunteer and be organized and so much more. I know that a lot of attention goes to the people who stand behind the podium that are brought in to participate, but I also want to thank those of you, from sponsors to the volunteers who have partnered with the African American Youth Harvest Foundation, but specifically with this third annual Changing the Story Luncheon to make the event possible. And really to those who are committed to making sure that the message about empowering our youth and their families through prevention, intervention, and support goes forth, and we're able to really make a difference in the lives of those impacted the most. I'd also like to thank those of you who are attending and supporting this great effort. Your presence and your continued support are greatly valued. The truth in all of this is that in addition to all the positive resources out there for our young people, positive resources and ideas often compete with the seemingly ever-present many negative ideas which come in easily consumed forms, such as through certain types of television, music, movies, and one can easily forget how influential those ideas can become in the lives of our young people who are listening and watching such programming every single day. Often understandings and therefore choices about relationships and many other important life matters are being framed by people and companies whose primary objective is really just to entertain, or for you all to become a consumer. Little do they talk about the consequences of things such as being in toxic or abusive relationships, the realities that come from teenage pregnancy, or trying to raise a kid, let alone multiple children by yourself or with limited resources. In many ways, life for our young people today is unfortunately like my favorite childhood game, Frogger, because there's a lot of fast oncoming traffic which they have to skillfully maneuver through to get to the other side. And the consequences of certain decisions in their life can forever change the outcome of their lives in ways that they never, ever imagined. And I'm sure that many of you here today have personally experienced or seen firsthand how certain decisions at key times in life can really impact lives, both for good or bad. Many of you all here today are on the front lines, seeking to educate, equip, encourage the disadvantaged youth of our community who are facing tough situations, trying to make better choices. Well, having made some poor choices in my own life that have affected me deeply and the lives of many others who cared for me, loved, supported, and believed in me, I'm very much aware of the deep impact that choices can have on one's life. It's a big reason why I do what I do now, trying to discourage others from going down similar paths in their lives by passionately encouraging them to begin to really write their own story and therefore their own ending. I also know what it's like for some people to only look at your mistakes and your poor choices and to turn the other way, but thankfully I also know about God's grace.
Yeah.
And the importance of people such as you here today, and the foundations such as the African American Youth Harvest Foundation, who understand that everyone's path is not just straightforward and clear, sometimes by circumstances, sometimes like me, by poor choices, but who are committed to helping others make better choices in their life's journey. So I'd like to take a moment to share a bit about my own personal journey and how I hope that something that I say will be useful and perhaps an encouragement to each of you here today. So now I'm sure that most of you all have read or seen something about my life from what's been in the media over the past decade. But before I go on, I think it's important to take you all back a few more years and give you some background and perspective about my life and why I really appreciate what this foundation is doing and why I'm so passionate about teaching our community the importance of really becoming the author of our own story and writing our own ending so that we are equipped and armed to make the right and best choices for our lives. And although I've seen that introductory video that you all saw a moment ago many times over the past 5 or 6 years, it's never really easy to look at. It's certainly not something that I watch in my free time or when friends come on over to my house. Because those 4 or so minutes of video span about 20 years of my life and stir up a lot of memories and emotions in me, some good and some deeply sorrowful, but all of them very, very real. The video is like a chronological collage of clips about my life up until a few years ago, but as we all know, our lives are really not just a few short clips spliced together with fancy cinematography and dramatic music. It's not a two-dimensional moving image projected on a screen. Life is so much more real than that. And so for the next couple of minutes, I'll like to fill you in on some more of my life story so that the video really didn't capture. Well, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. And when I was 3, my parents were divorced, and for a while my mom raised my brother and I as a single parent. A few years later, my mother married a wonderful man, and we thought we had the perfect family. And even though I was not his biological daughter, my stepfather treated me like I was his little girl. He showered me with love and taught me the right way, and in many ways, he was like the father that I never had. But unfortunately, almost as if it was too good to be true, when I was 7, my stepfather passed away. And once again, my mother was forced to be both mother and father to my brother and I. And really, back then, I was young, and I could not process everything. There was a lot of pain and confusion in my heart, and I certainly did not know how to deal with it properly. My mom tried her best with me, but I was definitely a handful. I'm sure many of you parents with teenage kids know exactly what I am talking about. And at that time, I really couldn't appreciate how much sacrifice my mother made for my brother and I. We were not poor, but we did not have a lot. My mom worked 2 jobs to have enough money to provide for us, and she would often drive over an hour and a half one way every day between her job, our school, and our homes. She loved me, but in many ways, that love was overshadowed by the lack of real love from my biological father and the loss of my stepfather. Fortunately, I found another outlet for all of my pent-up negative energy, and that was sports. When I was young, my mom tried to give me chances that she never had growing up, and fortunately, I found that outlet, and I participated in all kinds of sports, from gymnastics to t-ball to soccer to basketball, and of course track and field. And my mom and I soon realized at that early age that I was blessed with an enormous amount of physical talent. So much that during my high school years, my mom's sacrifices, driving me to sports clinics on the weekends, and even moving into a better neighborhood so that I can be academically challenged, finally began to pay off. I had a lot of success on the basketball court and on the track. I became a McDonald's All-American in basketball and the U.S. High School Track Athlete of the Year. And in fact, by the time I was 16 years old, I had made my first Olympic team. But to everyone's surprise, I gave up my spot on that Olympic team, and I traveled across the country to take up a basketball scholarship at the University of North Carolina. During my freshman year, I co-captained the schools to our first and only NCAA Division I basketball championship. Woohoo, Tar Heel. I also became an All-American in track and field as well, and on the outside, everything in my world seemed to be going great, but on the inside I was carrying around a lot of pent-up and emotional baggage from my past, stuff that really my achievements could not remove. And as I grew up and tried to understand and put certain things into perspective, I really couldn't get past certain things in my life. I like to say perhaps it would have been different if I never knew that my biological father even existed, but I did, and it hurt even more. Of course, this is me now talking to you as an adult, but when you're 19, 20 years old, that pain sometimes is really too hard to comprehend and to deal with. Once again, I tried to turn all of this stuff that was going on inside of me towards excelling in sports, and that I did. Unfortunately, my last few years of college became frustrating. I suffered a series of injuries for a period of time, and I was unable to do the things that athletically that made me feel so good about myself. It affected me deeply, and I started to lose focus, and my self-esteem began to slip. I began to lose my belief in myself, the things that I can do right for me. However, as my physical health returned, so did my athletic skills and athletic confidence, and by the time I graduated from the University of North Carolina in 1997, I decided to give up my last year of athletic eligibility and focus on my childhood dream of becoming the fastest woman in the world and becoming an Olympian. I was ready to conquer the world, but oddly enough, as confident as I was in my abilities to do well in sports, I was just as unsure about myself in other areas of my life. Personally and emotionally, I was extremely vulnerable and willing to trust anyone who was willing to kind of prop me up, make me feel good. So between my college graduation in 1997 and 2005, I became involved in two very high-profile relationships, and at that time, I simply ignored a lot of red flags about these guys because I thought that I needed something. I thought that they could provide for me. I wanted someone strong who would take care of me. And I'm certainly not blaming others for my poor choices, but I wanted to point out some things that can happen in life, really no matter who you are. After college, success came to me very quickly, no pun intended. But even after all of the fame and the money, the magazine covers, the endorsements, the accolades, the awards, my inner struggles didn't just disappear. They were still there. I was publicly projecting a confident and strong image, but my issues were still very actively undermining me within. I tried to keep running away from the truth of the pain that I never really understood, and in some ways was either too afraid to look at. And I like to say it's funny, well, sad funny, how we can know that something is not right with us, but we're either too proud or too ashamed, lazy, or stubborn to get help. But we can only run for so long before our past choices or lifestyle catches up with us. So by 2007, my life was very different. I had married a wonderful man, and for the first time since I left college, I had true friends who cared about me as a person. I had at that time 2 beautiful young boys. I have 3 now, actually. I have a 12-year-old son, an 8-year-old son, and a 6-year-old going on 26. But at that time, even as all of these new and positive things were forming, the baggage of my issues and the series of my past poor choices had finally caught up with me. And I was no longer the media darling, and the federal government was pursuing me for lying to them. And as you saw in the video, I pled guilty to those charges in October 2007, and I was sentenced to 6 months incarceration. The slow but very public downward spiral of my life from being the top female athlete in the world to a convicted felon was an indescribably painful and embarrassing one. But thankfully, I discovered that God had been with me all along through it all. And although I made the choices that ultimately caused me to lose so much, He was still there with me. And in March of 2008, I began serving time at a federal prison camp called Carswell, located right outside of Dallas-Fort Worth. And it wasn't like those hardcore lockup shows on NBC, but it was certainly far from the country club setting. And even though my time at Carswell was relatively short compared to many of the other inmates, the 49 days that I spent in solitary confinement was probably one of the most profound and life-changing times in my life. Being locked up by yourself in a 12 by 12 room for 23 hours a day, and sometimes for 24 hours a day, rattled me to the core. Not seeing my husband, and not being able to talk with my boys on their birthdays almost broke me. It was beyond hard. Spending that much time by yourself, physically confined, unable to reach out to anyone familiar for a hug or a kind word or anything not about prison was way beyond anything that I could have imagined or wished on anyone. Many nights, I was certainly close to the edge, wondering how I could go on. I would often cry myself to sleep while looking at pictures of my family, how I could have completely messed up everything in my life. But by the prayers and the support of family, friends, and fans, I was able to make it through. I wasn't raised in a particularly religious environment when I was young, but during my experiences in the year or so before and during prison, I started to appreciate how God had been with me all along, even before I acknowledged Him, and definitely in my darkest days. That by the time that I was released from prison, I was very wary of being in the public again. Sure, I did all the mandatory media interviews, but I really didn't want to put myself out there again. I wanted to really disappear and be anonymous. I wanted to be a wife and a mother, but God wasn't done with me. And despite my reluctance to open up to people again, He showed me that beyond my athletic abilities and my own personal and public failings, He was giving me a second chance to speak to people about the importance of choices and how those choices can affect our own lives and the lives of those around us in very real ways. He was showing me in many ways that the story had been written by Him long before I was born, but I had the ability to co-author it, and therefore to determine the ultimate ending. It was during those few months after I left Carswell that this idea that everyone has the ability to do the same really began to take shape in my life. During my time in solitary and the months after, I began to really reflect on why I had made certain choices in my life, but most importantly, what I could do moving forward to reshape my future. I developed this message called Take a Break, and the message is based on the spiritual principle that none of us can run away from, ultimately, that we'll reap what we sow, even if it's not in the time or the way that we imagined. All of our choices have consequences, both positive and negative consequences, from our lifestyle and health decisions to our relationships, to parenting, our finances, and so many other choices. Whatever we choose to do or not to do has a consequence. But the good thing is that God gives us, each one of us, free will. And if we take a break to really think about what we're doing or about to do, or where we're headed, or what type of people or drama or circumstances we allow into our lives, we can make better choices, which will empower us to become better prepared, smarter, or healthier. It could also help us to advance closer to our individual purpose and potential instead of getting trapped by situations or people that pull us away from being all that we can be. And while take a break may seem so plainly obvious, I've been amazed at how many people like me have foolishly ignored red flags all around them, or failed to get the proper advice, or simply resolved to make the right choices in various situations, and in the end pay a higher price than they had ever imagined. But it brings me to the part of my story and message that I like sharing the most, this whole idea of finding purpose and hope and redemption. But it all starts with taking responsibility not only for your past mistakes or your past failures, but perhaps most importantly for your future, our story, to move forward by faith in God and faith in yourself, especially after you failed yourself or others. As I often tell people, and I often need to remind myself, because I've learned that one of the hardest things to do is to accept God's forgiveness enough to forgive yourself. The thing which most defines you is what you do after you fall. I found out that we all fall and we all fail at some point in our lives. So even though everyone is not going to take that hard public fall like I did, the truth is that we all struggle, or we will struggle with something that trips us, or with some mountain that we'll either have to overcome or it will overcome us. So I've been given a second chance, and thankfully the final chapter in my life is not done, and it has not been written. And I realize now that I'm the author of that. I'll admit it's easy for me to get up here and talk, but not always easy to open up and talk about my mistakes and my weaknesses. However, I do it now because I know that I have a purpose beyond winning competitions or being a great athlete. Looking back, I now realize that sports simply gave me the platform to really do what I'm supposed to be doing. I want to take a moment to recognize the contribution of those of you who have embraced the vision and challenges of educating, encouraging, and equipping the young people in our community to make better choices in all aspects of their lives. I don't think that I understood this years ago when I was at the height of my athletic career. In the past, I chose to surround myself with people whose priority was not helping others. I did not make a bigger effort to live and be the real example that I should have been. And that's really what's been on my heart to share with you all today. I'm a witness to the fact that regardless of what you've lost or how you've lost it, you can take your life back and become the author of your own story and write your own ending. And I want to encourage you all to share this with the young people you encounter on a daily basis. I'm living proof that God is able to take broken pieces and put a life back together again.
All right.
Share with our youth that they can make it through their storms, and they can make it through their darkest days, that they can get past bad relationships and poor choices. Share with them that there's hope, there's redemption, and that there's second chances, that dead dreams can be resurrected, and that lost souls can be found. It might not happen overnight, and they might have to fight against the odds, against the naysayers, and sometimes even fight against themselves. But it can happen. It will happen if they move forward with faith and they don't let their past define their future. And the only way that it's going to change is when we all become involved. I know that it's a tough economy and we're all really feeling the pinch, but your financial contributions and support towards foundations such as the African American Youth Harvest Foundation can have a real impact on the lives of those in this community. It could literally help save lives, which is something that can't be said very often. So I'm encouraging you all to really dig deep so that the foundation will have the financial resources to bring about its vision to educate and to support those in need. In closing, I want to once again thank the organizers for allowing me to participate in this year's third annual Changing the Story Luncheon. Thank you to the sponsors, to the contributors for supporting this important work. Your continued support is vital in impacting lives. Thank you for allowing me to share some time with you this afternoon.